Good afternoon. Welcome to the Harrisonburg Rotary Club. I love that I get to see the shocked faces when people are taking a spoonful of dessert and they hear that loud bell, just kind of jolt them to attention. But yeah, glad that you're here on this beautiful fall day. And so let's start our meeting as always with the four-way test. So please join me in the things we think, say, and do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, today's song is by Don Meyerhopper. For space, for tins mad above the fruited plain. America, America, you all still sound good. Let's turn to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance and today's invocation will be by Eric Cotting. Dan, come on up and introduce guests and visitors.
Good afternoon. Hey, we've got some guests today. Ken Horst has two guests. Ken, would you get up and introduce your guests, please? Great. Thank you. And Nathan Blackwell brings a guest today. Why don't you introduce him for us, Nathan? Thanks. And Dave Larson has three guests, two guests, sorry. And the speaker today is the Sister Ann. So quick introduction. Thank you. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Dan. So with that said, I don't have any family Rotary announcements today. Anybody have anything that you'd like to bring to the attention of our club or family of Rotary? All right. So getting to a couple of announcements. We talk about in the rotograph to please continue to sign up your volunteer hours. We have a goal of 2,000 hours. And a Rotarian just asked me a question today, which is a great question. He said he does a lot of volunteer hours in his church and other organizations that he's connected to. Do those apply? Yes. So we want, as Rotarians, the clubs, the organizations that we're connected to besides just Rotary, we want to know that we're in our communities doing service work. So by all means, and if you feel like, wow, I didn't realize that those volunteer hours counted, you can go back in. I'm assuming the sheet will allow you to go back in and add hours. So add your row of hours. So please continue to let us know. I also want to draw attention again to our Rotary social event. It's coming up on October 6th. And there was a club email that went out. And so I would really encourage you, I'm guilty too, or I let the wave of emails pass by me. But we would love for you to RSVP. This is at Mulligan's Golf Center from 5 to 7. We have the pavilion for 2 hours, unlimited miniature golf, 4 bays reserved in the driving range. They have this new high-tech driving range. Bring guests, bring your kids, grandkids. You know, one of the things I've learned with my kids is the things they did with me and saw me do, it places a thought in their brain of value. So we'd love to bring your families out, just enjoy an evening of being together with your fellow Rotarians. So please RSVP. Michael will be sending another email update to that as well. Also, service. You know, as we know, during the pandemic, it wasn't easy to do consistent service. And so we've been trying to gear that up and get the machine going again. Quentin Callahan has been working along with Noah to help spur some things on. So Noah's going to talk about something that's come up quickly and maybe some hints of some more things to come. So Noah.
Yes. So this is very short notice, but the United Way is hosting the Day of Action this Wednesday, which is in 2 days. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but it's a community-wide opportunity to be able to volunteer at different locations, different nonprofits. I met with United Way and they recommended Adagio House, which is a nonprofit, a new nonprofit in our community. It's about 3 or 4 years old, that are providing mental health services at a sliding scale, which is something that's very much needed in our community. Because they are new, they're in a new building that is pretty run down on the outside. So on Wednesday, we're going to be painting, and I am leading a Harrisonburg Rotary Club team. So if you can get in touch with me either via email, or if you want to talk to me after today's meeting, I can get you connected on that team for Wednesday. You can either come during the morning or early afternoon. And then we are planning tentatively to have a service project day on October 8th. That is the second Saturday. Quentin had the idea of doing a second Saturday service every month. And so this is the start of that. So if you have any questions, just talk to me after the meeting.
Thank you, Noah. So we won't make a habit of 2-day notice for service projects, but this was an established United Way event. Noah and the team saw the opportunity. So it's an already established day of service, but just a chance for those of you that want to jump in and give back to your community. And we'll give more updates on future service opportunities coming up. So the last thing I just want to mention in my notes, there are some people that have had perfect attendance that haven't got their pins. Come see Michael if you've been announced for perfect attendance and you haven't received your pin. We're going to do a bunch more in October for people that are doing their perfect attendance. So with that said, enough of us. Dave, come tell us about today's speaker. Introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So it's my pleasure to introduce my sister Anne to the club today. So Anne, she moved to Japan in 1997, and you know, for the first probably 8 or 10 years she was in Japan. I was really hoping that she would come back to the States and she would come back and live in America. When she came back, she did come back for a couple years to get her her master's in linguistics at Old Dominion. And when I called her, I noticed the voicemail was in Japanese first, and then it was in English. And so then I knew, okay, well, she's going to be there for probably the rest of her life. So, so I'm so proud of my sister. And she's really she has a heart for the Japanese people and the Japanese culture. I'll read her bio that she provided to us here. So Anne Crescini is an associate professor at the University of Kitakyushu in Fukuoka, Japan. Originally from Wytheville, Virginia, or we call it Wolfville. She's been living and working in Japan for about 22 years. In addition to teaching English at her university, she also has her own radio program. She appears as a TV commentator and has a regular column in the local newspaper. She's written 18 books and gives lectures all over Japan on various topics related to language and culture. She also reached her dream of being a TEDx speaker, appearing on at the stage at TEDx Fukuoka, both in 2018 and also in 2020. So please give a welcome to Anne Crescini.
Well, it's nice to see everybody here today. I give about 100, I give about 40 lectures a year around Japan, and this is the second English lecture I've given in my entire life. So I'm a little bit nervous. And I also usually speak for about 90 minutes. My brother was like, if you go a minute past 1, you are in trouble. So, but anyway, it's very nice to be here with you guys today. Thanks for having me. Like Dave said, I've lived in Japan for 22 years. And today I want to talk about a little bit about the differences in how Japan and the US has dealt with COVID. And as a language and culture researcher, this pandemic has just been a wealth of materials about culture, about worldview, about values, and things like that. So today I want to just share with you a little bit about things that I've experienced. I can start out by saying that the US and Japan are exactly the opposite in pretty much everything, and especially how they've dealt with COVID. Honestly, I am really still trying to get used to not wearing a mask in public, because I've been wearing one for almost 3 years. Even when I teach, when I give lectures, most people wear them in their car when nobody's around. I mean, it's just it's a huge mask culture. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about the beginnings of COVID and how the Japanese responded to it, and then the things that I've noticed that are different, and how the US and Japan have dealt with it. So in March 2020, everyone knows that COVID got really bad all over the world, and it got bad in Japan a few weeks before it got bad in the States, I think, because it started, of course, in Asia. It was really extraordinary that I think sometime around the beginning of March, the Japanese government closed all schools, all public schools, private schools in the entire country, was just an extraordinary thing to do. And the schools were closed for about a month. And at the beginning of the pandemic, the government said there's this term in Japanese called "yoroshiku onegaishimasu," which means, could you please do this and do me the honor of your favor, kind of. It's impossible to translate, but, and so the government said to the people, this is a very bad thing. Could you please, stay home for a little bit? Could offices and businesses please close? And we'd really appreciate it if you work together for the sake of the country. And I'm sitting here, there's no way that's going to work. You just can't say please and ask people to stay home, right? But it was really extraordinary. They did. Not one person, all the businesses closed, all the people stayed home for a week, and there's never been any kind of enforced lockdown or any enforced mask wearing or any enforced anything in Japan. And the reason for that is two things. First of all, it's an extremely group-oriented culture, whereas many Western countries, including the US, are more individualistic countries. And so the Japanese people, everything they do, they have in mind, how are my actions going to affect other people? Right? So everything that they do, I mean, whether you go to work or you go to school or you say something or you don't say something, it's all about, well, how are my actions going to affect other people? And that can be good, but that can also be bad in a lot of ways. In the early days of the pandemic, I was super impressed because it kept the numbers of COVID incredibly low at the early days of the pandemic. Japan is the most densely populated country in the world. And for almost a year, we had very few COVID cases, even in Tokyo, which is one of the most crowded cities in the world. And I attributed that just to the incredible group spirit and the group-oriented way of thinking, which was incredibly moving to me to see just this cooperation for the sake of the group. But as time wore on, the government just kept saying, could you please do this? And they're like, we're going to have the Olympics and invite everybody from all over the world, but could you guys please stay home? And the Japanese people got kind of a little bit irritated, because it was almost like, like when we use our cell phones at the table, when we're eating dinner and we tell our kids you can't use your cell phones, and we're sitting there using our cell phone. It was kind of the same thing. Like, the Japanese people are like, well, you're going to have the Olympics and invite people from all over the world. Therefore, I'm going to go hang out with my friends, kind of thing. And so about last summer sometime, I started noticing a breakdown of the group spirit and in the group oriented mentality. And people just honestly, like all over the world, they just got tired, they got tired of staying home. They got tired of not having dinner with their friends. They got tired of all the rules. But that being said, they got tired in a very cute, like very, very semi-rebellious way. Like they went out to dinner with their friends. They had parties, but the wearing of masks, the social distancing, and the hand sanitizing has been one constant that has continued throughout this pandemic. So I want to talk a little bit about the idea of masks and why masks are so accepted and almost desirable in Asian cultures. First of all, the native religion in Japan is called Shinto. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Shinto, but it's the native Japanese religion. It's an animistic religion, a polytheistic religion where it's called the land of 8 million gods. So the gods live in pretty much everything in Japan. So Japanese people often go to to Shinto shrines to worship the gods, but also just in nature, they worship the gods in nature. So a very long time ago, when they would go to worship the gods, they would wear a mask because the breath is considered to be impure and they didn't want to defile the gods. So the idea of mask wearing has been present in Japanese culture for many, many years. And then after that, since I came to Japan, it's been very common when anyone had a cold, or if you had hay fever, or if you just felt a little bit under the weather, people have been wearing the white surgical masks for as long as I can remember. And as an American, I remember going there, just being shocked. I'm like, do you guys have like the plague or something? Like I'd be seeing everybody wearing masks. But it's been accepted. No one's ever been uncomfortable or weirded out by it at all. It's always been a part of the culture. So in March, there was like this huge rush on masks, and we had a massive mask shortage in Japan. There was no masks to be found anywhere. So they're very ingenious, and so they started making their own masks, or they would make them with handkerchiefs and rubber bands or whatever. But from about April of 2020, it became this unspoken societal rule that you're going to wear a mask. And a lot in Japanese culture, there's never any laws or enforcement of anything. In fact, the Japanese constitution does not allow forced lockdown of any country during any pandemic or any other situation. So a lockdown or enforced things like that is illegal in Japanese society. But there is incredible, crushing societal pressure in Japan to conform and be like everyone else. So there's never really any need to have any kind of enforce anything because there's so much societal pressure to do so. So people started wearing masks in the schools. The schools have, from the start of COVID until today, 100% mask mandates, but they're not really mandates. They're just please wear a mask, and everybody does it. Buildings, restaurants, anything inside is 100% mask. Everyone wears a mask. And it's almost gotten to the point where it's gotten to be part of like an accessory, kind of like just like a necktie. You put on your necktie, you put on your mask. In fact, kids call the mask kaopantsu, which means pants for my face, which means it's like if you forget your mask, it's almost like you forgot to put on your pants. That's kind of the same kind of feeling. It's gotten to be that point. And, I have always been an advocate of mask wearing because I saw from the early days of the pandemic how low the COVID numbers were kept in Japan. And I'm not saying that it's completely due to masks. I have no idea. But considering we have such a densely populated country and such low COVID numbers, I couldn't help but think, well, maybe possibly it had to do with masks. There was a lot of other strict rules. For example, children have been forbidden from talking at lunchtime since COVID began. So there's like massive dividers between the kids at lunch, and when they take off their masks, they can't talk. You're not supposed to talk on the trains. You're not supposed to talk on the buses. Even if you're wearing a mask, they want silence. And that's another one of those unspoken rules, So, to me, like generally, I think they're a good idea. But at some point in the pandemic, maybe about a year ago, I started seeing like this weird, like mask, like addiction, or like, I don't know, like it was kind of like they can't like, I was like, we're going to wear masks forever. Like I had this feeling we're never going to get out of it, and personally, I've been wearing a mask for my whole time in Japan, and I have no trouble breathing or anything. Like to me, it's just a natural thing to do. But at the same time, it's a sad thing because I don't know what my students look like. I don't know their names. I can't remember their names because I can't see their faces. and even elementary school students, they have gotten this weird like mental something or other where they feel like embarrassed if they show their faces now and they don't want to take off the mask. And I've heard from students here that I've heard there's been a lot of the same phenomenon where even after they were told they didn't have to wear masks, students had to wear them for a while because they felt like they were naked without them, right? So, my kids even wear masks during online classes. Can you believe that? Online classes, they'll still wear masks. People wear masks in their car. They wear masks outside when it's 100 degrees outside. I don't think necessarily they think that it's I don't think so much in Japan it's for disease prevention as much as it is just they're just used to it and everyone else is doing it. So I got to do it too. In fact, when I was in DC, I met a lot of Japanese people in DC and none of them were wearing masks, so a lot of it I think is the societal pressure of being in the Japanese culture like that. So on the other hand, and so at the beginning of COVID, I was like, oh, this is just, they're thinking about other people. It's awesome, and then, you turn on the news and I would watch CNN or something and someone was getting body slammed at Walmart for not wearing a mask or something like that. And I'd be like, wow, I could just really feel the cultural differences, between the US and Japan. And I know that the US is traditionally not a mask wearing culture. And so it's a really hard thing for a lot of people to accept, so what's good, what's bad, I'm not making a judgment on that. I'm just observing the differences in the culture, whereas Japan is a very group oriented culture, so everything they do, most of them wear masks not to protect themselves, but they don't want to pass COVID on to anyone else, or they don't want people to like say something to them about it, so it's just easier to wear one, right? So I think at this point Japan's taking it a little bit too far, and there needs to be an escape route for masks because kids are like having heat stroke and stuff like that during the summer, wearing the mask. And there's a lot of voices being raised right now. You need to, like we got to come to some kind of happy medium here somewhere. Another thing is the idea of immigration and border control, which has been an interesting thing that has happened. I'm going back to LA. I'm going to LA on the 26th, 2 days before I return to Japan. The reason for that is I had to get a PCR test, a COVID test before returning to Japan when I bought my ticket. But after I bought my ticket, they did away with that. So I don't have to do it anymore. But I am like totally crazy about Japan. I have lived there my whole life and I have felt that I'm Japanese. I love it there. I'm very comfortable there and I've been very, very accepted. But COVID has brought, like in the US, has brought out a lot of bad things in Japan. And I think it's brought out a lot of bad things in every country. I think, when you're faced again, like with a crisis of the magnitude of COVID, I think it's going to bring out a lot of the bad things and a lot of the fear. And that was definitely the case in Japan. In March, and the reason I'm here 3 years after COVID started for the first time is because of Japan's border policies. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. Dave and our father passed away in the beginning of COVID in March of 2020. And it was right when the US was just really getting the worst of it. New York, do you remember when New York was just in a terrible state and was locked down? And our brother lives in New York, so my dad passed away. He couldn't get down from New York. Dave has a lot of children, and he couldn't get to my mom. My mom was all alone. We couldn't have the funeral. I couldn't get back to Japan to the States from Japan. So it was just a really sad time for our family. And so I'm like, well, I'll get back to, as soon as things calm down, I'll get back to the States for the funeral. Like, we'll have a funeral, if I can get back. So right after that, from April of 2020 until September, Japan completely closed the border to new entry and to re-entry for all foreigners. And that I'm sure it was a knee-jerk reaction because they were scared of COVID just like everyone else was at that point. But I have permanent residency in Japan. I have a green card. I've had it for the last 8 years. And Japan was the only of the G7 countries. Japan was the only one to group permanent residents with tourists instead of with citizens, right? So all the other countries, including the US, put permanent residents in the same category as citizens, whereas Japan put permanent residents in the same category as tourists. In other words, if I had left Japan to go to my dad's funeral, I could not have gotten back into the country. And it really made me bitter. Like I was really bitter. I felt like I've given my whole life to this country. I've loved this country. I've served this country. I've left my family. I haven't seen my family in years. I've left them for this, to serve in this country, to educate Japanese people in English. And yet this is how they were going to just treat me like a tourist. And, for many years, I was just for many months, I was very, very bitter and just felt like just treated very poorly. And finally, they in September of 2020, they allowed reentry for residents, but they still blocked all new entry for students or workers, and they've also blocked tourists. In fact, tourists are still blocked from Japan until they're finally going to open the country up next month to tourists. The strictest immigration policies and border policies in the world. Japan has a tendency to link to group foreigners and Japanese in this very clear separation. There's not a difference between permanent residents and workers and spouses of people in military and all this. It's just you're a foreigner and I'm a Japanese, that's it, kind of thing. And, it was really hard for me to be, because it was the first time I really felt like that in many years. Like, gosh, I really am an outsider here. Maybe I don't belong here. And I found myself getting really, really like kind of bitter and angry towards Japan. But then I realized, every country has its things, right? Like there's a lot of things in the US that are good and a lot of things that are not so good. There's a lot of things in Japan that are good and a lot of things are not so good. And the average Japanese person is very kind and very accepting of me, 100% of me. So I got to the point where I, was just like, this is just it's an island country that was isolated for, until the Meiji era in 1868. It has only 2% foreign population, 98% Japanese. It's still, people like Japanese grandmas still touch my face when I go out and they're like, wow, we don't see people like you like around here anymore. It's a very, very rural country area, so I kind of just got to that point where I was just like, you know what, I still love it, even though, of all these things. And I still love the group spirit. I love the way that they sacrifice and give of themselves for others and the ways they've sacrificed and given for others for me. They don't have, their commitment is to the group. They don't have the commitment to personal ideologies and belief systems as strongly as the US does, Like, for example, my Japanese friends would watch the news and they'd be like, I don't understand this whole vaccine thing. Like, why are people so opposed to it? Because most Japanese would be like, well, I'm scared of the vaccine and or I don't say most, I mean, a small percentage would be like, oh, I don't know, I'm kind of worried, but everyone else is going to do it, so I'll do it too, right? There's not that strong, this is my sword and I'm going to die on it kind of mentality that you find in the US regarding many issues, whether it's religion or vaccines or politics or, gender issues or whatever. Like there's that, this is what I believe and I'm not going to move from this no matter what kind of mentality that you'll find in the US. Japan is not a religious country, so they don't have that strong religious foundation. And so it's pretty much their religion is with the group. So I'll just kind of go along and do what the group does. And in the cases of a pandemic, that can be very beneficial, right? Oh, I want to do this, but I got to think of the other people and not think about myself, right? And so in the early days of the pandemic, it was very, very successful because they're very serious and they're very group oriented. But as time wore on, it started to break down because people were like, oh, I'm tired of doing the group. What about me? I haven't seen my friends in 2 years. I mean, even now you can't, if a woman has a baby, the husband can't be there at the birth of the baby because of, of fear of infection. If your mom dies, only 5 people can be in the crematorium to see, to be there with her. And so there's been a lot of grief, a lot of delayed grief, a lot of loss because of the strict rules regarding, infection control and stuff like that. But even now, that there's no more of these semi-lockdowns that we kind of had, please stay home kind of things, and events were canceled. Like all of my events were canceled and even now my events are being canceled, lectures and things like that. But now it's starting to loosen up and there's a lot more, there's really not anything being canceled so much like it used to be. Things are going on as normal. The kids still can't talk at lunch. Everyone still has to wear a mask. Border controls are loosening up a little bit, but there's still, like, one of the things that shocked me when I came here is there's not really hand sanitizer anywhere. Like in Japan, there's hand sanitizer entrance at every single store, every single restaurant, every single school, every business, and even at your table when you're at a restaurant. There's plastic dividers everywhere you go to eat at restaurants. If you go to offices like the city hall, there's a plastic divider everywhere you go. There's that. There's still social distancing going on. There's still everyone wears a mask, and so while there is a lot of freedom, but there's still not that like I can do what I want kind of mentality. And while I'm very fortunate, and I think living in Japan during the pandemic has been, I mean, I haven't caught COVID yet, and I have been very active going around everywhere, because I think in my mind I've kind of moved a little bit to the Japanese thinking, but it's still considered a plague over there, whereas here it's considered to be like the flu or a cold. In Japan, it's still considered the plague, and so you're only able to be treated at a certain number of hospitals, and you have to be quarantined for a really long time, and everyone who's around you has to be quarantined for a really long time. So it's really rather draconian in their measures still, but you know, it's been a blessing to live there and to feel like the group mentality and the group spirit. But at the same time, I am just mentally tired. Like I'm tired of just constantly worried about how my actions are going to affect others, you know, and not feeling like I have the freedom to do what I want without feeling any kind of guilt or anything like that. So in that way, you know, I come to the States and I don't know which country is doing things better. I have no idea. But there is a lot more freedom here, and it seems like people are enjoying life a little bit more than people in Japan. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think anyone knows what's the right thing to do or who's doing right, but you know, I do think that the communal spirit in Japan, how people just are constantly looking out for each other, and that's something that's been, you know, ingrained in their history for many years. Is something that I really respect and have learned a lot of myself about. But anything taken too far can become a bad thing, you know. And I think if you take that, you know, worrying about how other people react too far, it's going to be like you're going to crush individuality, and you're going to like feel like totally oppressed all the time. And I think that's kind of it's headed right now. So I'd like to find, I've been researching culture and language for 20 years, and I've been comparing the U.S. and Japan to each other for 20 years regarding education, family, religion, all of these things. And every single thing I study, I always find Japan here and the U.S. here, like at opposite extremes in every single topic that I study. And I often think if there could somewhere be some kind of middle ground somewhere, it would be like a really like perfect kind of culture and way of thinking. So I'm very fortunate. I'm very thankful to the opportunities that I've had to live in Japan. I've lived half my life here and half my life there. And so I feel like I can see both countries, both the good points and the bad points. I feel like I can see them very clearly. And I can take, for my own life, I can take the good things and the bad things. I can take the good things and leave the things that I don't like from both countries. But I think for us, as humans, I think it's very important for us to learn about other cultures and the way and other people's values, not just other cultures, but people from other areas of the U.S. Because I think we can learn from each other. I think that if we are isolated in our own communities, we're unable to see the good things and the bad things of our own communities. But if we look outside of our community and we see how other areas of the U.S. or other people do things, other countries, I think we can learn from other countries, and I think we can see what's really good about our own culture, and that's just a really good thing. And then, but maybe that country has it right on that issue, and I think we can learn and grow as humans, and if we always have that open heart and that heart that's always willing to learn from each other. So, anyways, that's my insights for today. I hope you guys enjoyed my insights about Japan, and if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. So, thank you so much. Thank you.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. So did you all have the same access to the same vaccines that we had in the States?
Yeah, we had access to the vaccines. The vaccine rollout was much slower in Japan. We got it a lot later, several months later, almost 8 to 10 months later, I think, than Japan had them. So because they're very careful, like they don't want to have any accidents or any mistakes, and so they tested. There's a lot more strict approval process for vaccines. But right now they're mainly using the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines in Japan. But most people I know have only gotten 3 shots. The 4th shot has not been made available to the general public. It's controlled by the government. Like I came here and I went to the drugstore and I'm like, you can get a vaccine in the drugstore in the US? You know, that's so cool because in Japan you can only do it at a hospital. And you have to get a coupon from the government. And when your coupon comes, you can call and make your appointment. That's kind of how it works. So, yeah.
I had a question about the culture of work. The Japanese have always been traditionally viewed as being very loyal to their companies and extremely dedicated to work. We've seen our culture change obviously pretty significantly since post-COVID here in the United States. Our workforce is very fractured. A lot of people are working from home. A lot of people are not participating in the workforce at all. How did COVID affect work in Japan, and how does that culture of loyalty to your company weathering against COVID?
I think that the idea of loyalty, that like the lifelong was starting to break down even before COVID. One thing that COVID really brought out about Japan is just how dismally behind they are technologically regarding online classes and remote work. Online classes were not available to the kids until several months into the pandemic. And remote work was dismal. They were almost all companies were ill prepared for that, and it did not go well at all. And it's still not going well. I mean, because there's that like sell your soul to the company kind of mentality. And so as soon as the numbers of cases decreased, the companies were like, okay, back to work for you guys. And so the government has constantly been saying, you know, as much as possible, let's do remote work, but not many of the companies are really listening to that. And so it's really brought out the technological woes of Japan. I mean, we still use a fax machine in Japan. Do you guys use that here? The fax? Right? Like we still use the fax machine. And so there's a lot of technological problems, but remote work it is more than it was before, but it's still way behind. But there are a lot of people. There's really not that thing you see in the States where people aren't participating in the workforce. You don't see that because work is considered almost like a god in Japan, and you work. If you don't work, you don't eat. And that's a countrywide mentality. And so, you know, while there's a lot more social programs in Japan, for example, socialized healthcare and a lot of programs like that. People don't see it as like, I'm gonna take advantage of that. It's like, I'm gonna do that if I hit hard luck and I need it, but I'm not gonna like use it. I mean, of course there are gonna be people like that, of course, but it's not so common. Like work is a very highly valued thing in Japan, and seen as something. I mean, like even for example, the garbage collectors in Japan, they see their job as completely critical to society, and it's something to take pride in. So they will run from garbage spot to garbage spot, pick up the garbage, and to throw it in the garbage, and to do their job as a garbage collector and as my place in society as quickly and as well as I can do my job. And whether you go to McDonald's or you go to a 5-star restaurant, you're going to get the same service and the same high level of quality service and politeness. Like the thing that shocked me here, I was in the airport. I was checking out and someone was the cashier was talking on her cell phone and drinking a Mountain Dew while I was trying to check out. You know, I was shocked by that. You know, but there's a lot of pride is taken in the work. I think they overwork and they have a tendency to to be on the extreme of work sometimes. But at the same time, they do take a lot of pride in work, and work is a very honorable thing. So as far as seeing people leave the workforce and stuff, I haven't seen as much of that in Japan.
Thank you for that very insightful message. You know, I was thinking about one of the ideals of Rotary is to build understanding among culture. And that's one of the reasons we're here, not only to serve, to get to know people, but also to be advocates, right, for helping to build understanding about how people live. And so very well done. Thank you. Again, thanks to the rest of our guests, Ken and Annette and Jake, and the whole Larson Connected family. I don't have those names all memorized. Thanks, and we are adjourned.